Yo, peace to the 12, man. Y'all see the title. Charles Darwin called Europeans a deadly species. I'm going to say this one more time. Charles Darwin called Europeans a deadly species. In one of his books, this guy really doesn't need an introduction. Oh, you know who Charles Darwin is. You're familiar with him. He's the guy responsible for the thing that's taught today as so-called evolution. And also, even though this isn't really the video for that, but did you know that Charles Darwin was his teacher was a so-called black man by the name of John, I believe it's John Edmonston. Yeah, John Edmonston was a so-called black man who taught Darwin taxidermy. Right, he gave him the technical skills of how to preserve different specimens, right, as well as the knowledge on tropical environments. Um, so yeah, look that guy up, John Edmonston. It's spelled like John Edmund Stone. But anyway, this ain't the video for that. I might do a separate video on that. And so yeah, Charles Darwin, naturalist, geologist, British biologist, geologist, and naturalist. He was celebrated for his theory of evolution and natural selection. Right? Yeah, y'all know the dude. Anyway, he wrote a book called "The Voyage of the Beagle" by Charles Darwin. We're gonna go. That's what we're gonna look at on the page where he talks about Europeans being agents of death to all aboriginals around the world, and that goes part and parcel with what this lesson is going to be about, which is the fact that he was correct, because these people, so-called Europeans of today, they're just Edomites, all right, and they rule by the sword, all right, through violence, through death, bloodshed. Anyway, so we're gonna go to The Voyage of the Beagle by Charles Darwin, page 459. We're gonna go down to here, this pink part all the way down to yellow. All right, so here we go. It reads, besides the several evident causes of destruction, there appears to be some more mysterious agency generally at work. Now check this out. This is what he says right here. Wherever the European has trod, meaning walked or stepped, wherever the European has stepped, death seems to pursue the aboriginal. Let me say that again. Wherever the European has trod, death seems to pursue the aboriginal. We may look to the wide extent of the Americas, Polynesia, the Cape of Good Hope, and Australia, and we find the same result. Right? So and I say this all the time when I used to do my video on the origins of the Edomites, and people are like, well, why do you say they don't come from where we think they come from? And I'm like, well, they don't come from America, but they live in America. They don't come from Australia, but they live in Australia. They don't come from New Zealand, but they live in New Zealand. Do you see the pattern there? Do you see that? They don't come from Canada, but they live in Canada, right? But nonetheless, Australia, we find this. Let me read that one more time. Wherever the European has trod, death seems to pursue the aboriginal. We may look to the wide extent of the Americas, Polynesia, the Cape of Good Hope, and Australia, and we find the same result. That's the damn truth. Now he says, nor is it the white man alone that thus acts the destroyer. That's true. Of course, we know that other nations of people also are capable of violence, but key word but. No other nation has been as successfully violent as the Edomites, aka the so-called white man. All right, that's just reality. All right, and there's a reason for that I'm gonna go into in this video in a minute. But he says the Polynesian or Malay extraction has in parts of the East Indian archipelago thus driven before him the dark-colored native. The varieties of man seem to act on each other in the same way as different species of animals, and stronger always extirpating the weaker. That's him pushing his natural selection theory. Now, when we go down to here, he says the Reverend John Williams, in his interesting work, says that the first intercourse between natives and Europeans is invariably attended with the introduction of fever, dysentery, or some other disease, which carries off numbers of the people. Yeah, people were killed by dysentery, diseases, fevers that were brought. Again, he affirms, it is certainly a fact which cannot be controverted that most of the diseases which have been raged in the islands during my residence there have been introduced by ships, which means, aka, they were introduced by the so-called white man. They brought the plagues, and what renders this fact remarkable. Alright, so I'm going to go into the rest of this video. Of course, you guys already know, this being a biblical channel, we're going to go into that, this because they're Edomites. Alright, first of all, and he talked about Cape of Good Hope, Australia, Polynesia, Americas, right? Diseases that are brought. Well, let's start this off with Habakkuk 2 and 12. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood and establisheth a city by iniquity. And all these towns that have been created through bloodshed, all right, through deceit. But that'll be that's a whole other video that I'll probably touch on about all the heinous shit that the children of Esau have done, just in general. But and by the way, yes, the so-called white men are the Edomites, or who you call the so-called white men today. Most of them are the Edomites. All right, just period. And I'm gonna prove that by going through these verses. I've done this a million times, and now we're about to do it 1,000,001. So start off with Genesis 36 and 10. Someone can say, "How do you know this?" I'll break it down for you as simple as possible. Genesis 36 and 10. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau; Reuel, the son of Bashemoth, the wife of Esau. So Esau had a son named Eliphaz, and through Eliphaz he has a son named Amalek. That's in Genesis 36 and 12. And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz Amalek. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. So through Esau you get Eliphaz. Through Eliphaz you get Amalek. And we go to 1 Samuel 15 and 32. It says, Then said Samuel, Bring ye hither to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came unto him delicately, and Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. So Agag was a king of the Amalekites, who descends from Amalek, who is the son of Eliphaz, who goes back to Esau. Now we go to Esther 3 and 10. It says, And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. So the Agagite comes from a descendant of Agag, who was a king of the Amalekites, who goes back to Eliphaz, which goes back to Esau. Now when we go to additions to Esther in 16 and 10, it says, For Haman, a Macedonian, the son of Hammedatha, being indeed a stranger from the Persian blood and far distant from our goodness, and as a stranger received of us. So Haman, another word for an Agagite, was a Macedonian. So Haman was a Macedonian, which is an Agagite, which goes back to Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites, which goes back to Amalek, which goes back to Eliphaz, which goes back to Esau. Now it says Haman was a Macedonian. So who else was a Macedonian? Of course, none other than Alexander. All right, who you call Alexander the Great. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 verse 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chedum, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece. So Alexander, the son of Philip, was a Macedonian, right? Which means he was an Agagite, which means he was a descendant of Amalek, which means he goes back to the lineage of the Edomites. Yes, the Alexander the Great, the king of Macedonia. Notice it said what? Alexander, the son of Philip. Look, Philip II is the father of Alexander the Great. All right, it's real instant. Now going back to the part where I said that where Charles Darwin in his book The Voyage of the Beagle, where he said that wherever the European has trod, death seems to pursue the Aboriginal. That is that is Esau living out his blessing, man. His blessing. You read about that in Genesis 27 and 38. Really, it starts at 40 or 39, but we'll just read 37 through 41. Or we'll read 37 through 40, actually. 38 through 40. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and the dew of heaven from above. So he was given the fatness of the earth. That's why his ass is in places like Polynesia. That's why he's in the Americas. That's why he's in the Cape of Good Hope. That's why he's in Australia. That's why he's in South Africa. That's why he's in the land of Israel today. He was given the fatness of the earth. And what does the fatness of the earth mean? It means the fat of the land, the best or riches of anything. Right? That's what it means. Right? And he was given the fattest earth. Look at all these places where the so-called white man is at. Right? Rather, it's the Americas. You got South Africa. All right? Europe. Permeates through Asia. He's in Australia. Canada. All right? But anyway, let's continue on. What else is part of his blessing? It says, and Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. Now check this out. It says, and by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. So by the sword, he lives by the sword. Meaning what? By the weapon. That's how he lives. He lives by the weapon. All right. They have you think in today's world, they have you think that, he rules through, we're ruling through democracy and, everybody needs a fair shake. And no, he rules by the damn barrel of the gun and a missile and a tank. All right, all that other shit don't matter. I'm going to do a video. I don't know if I'm going to do it on this channel. I don't know if I'm going to start on another channel, but I'm going to do a video on the racist coding of democracy. All right. But, just to spoil it right now, like, democracy only matters if they're the majority. So when they say that everybody needs to vote or right to matter, no. Because if the majority of people are brown and or black and or yellow, they're going to have a damn problem with that. And all of a sudden it's not going to be, we're on the majority rule. But nonetheless, that's a whole nother video. But yeah, so let's go back to here real quick. It says, by the sword thou shalt live, Genesis 27:40. Funnily enough, when you go into Revelation 6:4, and it talks about the red horse that was given a great sword, that's talking about Esau still. It's talking about the Edomites. Revelation 6:4, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword, and a great sword. Yeah, he's killed a lot of damn people in his heyday. And peace is taken from the earth. There's wars every damn where, all the time, for resources, because resources are scarce, because there's an individual group that is stealing resources. And then it says they shall kill one another. They've been killing one another, which is funnily enough, right? Like you have the Russia Ukraine thing happening now, but the American Revolution was what? So-called white Americans, majority of them at least, versus the British. Right? The American Civil War. So it's always been killing one another. Rather, you want to talk about the 100 Years' War, French Revolution, so on and so forth. But nonetheless, there's given him a great sword. This is, once again, this goes back to the sword that Esau was given in Genesis 27:40. Right? There's given a great sword. And the key word to prove that is the red part. All right, just like you hear about the red dragon, that's also talking about Esau. But Genesis 25:30, and Esau said to Jacob, feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage. For I am faint, therefore was his name called Esau. Genesis 25:25, and the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and called his name Esau. Right, so that red is it's a hint of who it's talking about. A lot of times we read on further throughout the scriptures, whether it's the red horse, right? It's giving him the great sword. That's Esau. And then also the red dragon you read about also in Revelations is also talking about Esau. But nonetheless, it said by his sword he shall live. Well, the sword is what? Military power, violence, destruction. That's what a sword means. Literary, military power, violence of destruction. Right? A tool. Right? And it's through, machine guns, bombs. Machine guns and bombs. That's how he rules. He doesn't rule through no damn democracy. He didn't get none of those lands that he occupies today. Was not given by democracy. Also, speaking of that, what I said earlier about the land of Israel, right, where the Amalekites, who claim to be something that nonetheless, in that land, when it comes to like the Palestinian state, for those of you that don't know, right, what did all these pundits say about that land? Oh well, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, which is by the way, it's not even true. There's a whole other country that has a democracy in the Middle East, but nonetheless, they say Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Yeah, but that democracy is perpetuated through what? It's perpetuated through an apartheid system, right? Meaning what? So-called Jewish citizens do not have the same rights as the Jewish citizens. You understand? And that once again goes back to what I said earlier, where I said that, um, democracy is rooted in racism. All right, because yeah, they get to vote, but it's only so-called Israelis who get to vote. They don't give a shit about the Palestinians, even though once upon a time, guess what? The Palestinians outnumbered them. Do you understand? So that, yeah, once again, I'm going to do a video on democracy. I don't know if I'm going to do it on this channel or another channel that I think about making, but nonetheless, I'm going to do it. But, nonetheless, Habakkuk 2 and 6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him and a taunt proverb against him and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long to him that layeth himself with thick clay? And they have certainly increased that which is. Like it says, it rules by the sword. Well, also it tells you in Revelations, I didn't include it, but Revelations also tells you what? He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. He that leadeth into captivity must go into captivity. That's the faith and patience of the saints. All right? So those that live by the sword, ultimately they're going to, they lose to the sword. And when we look at the continents, they definitely inherited the fatness of the earth. Because look at these continents. Europe, so they're in Europe. Asia, there are some in Asia as well. It's particularly Western Asia. Africa, South Africa, North America, Canada, United States, South America, Argentina, Australasia, Oceania, and Antarctica, right? So they're permeating throughout North America, Europe, South America, and Australia. Well, we already know, this doesn't even have to really be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we look at the United States, we know that in order for them to occupy the United States, at least 56 million indigenous people over about 100 years in South and Central North America, they lost their lives. All right? That's how they got here. It's Australia, it's no different. All right? There was massacres of Aboriginal people. 1 to 1.5 million before the invasion. Now there's only 100,000. Genocide in Australia. Now the main population of Australia is what? 87% so-called white people. Right? Rather, we're talking about New Zealand. There's an all-white city in South Africa, or all-white town in South Africa called Orania. Or rather, we're talking New Zealand, right? Where the population is 74% Caucasian. All right, even though we know the Maori people originally inhabited there. All right, the Maori people were originally over there, and yet there was a Maori genocide that went on, that took place. All right, when we look at Hawaii, 61% is Caucasian. All right, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are way down numbered, 0.2%, man. Right? And these people are even in damn Antarctica. Argentina, mostly Edomites. Australia, mostly Edomites. France, Italy, Russia, UK, United States. So yeah, So yeah, this wasn't going to be a long video, man. I just wanted to touch on some things. And yeah, Charles Darwin was right. This is a deadly species because they're living out their blessing right now. All right, but hey, that blessing has a time limit, and it's already starting to show the cracks. That's why you have all these damn, that's why you have these damn so-called far right people talking about, oh, we're being replaced and all that. First of all, you already did the replacement. I'm gonna do a video on that too, called "The Great Replacement Already Happened," and you devils caused it. But nonetheless, man, that's it. Charles Darwin called Europeans a deadly species, man. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying, man. With that, I say peace to the 12. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to the Heavenly Father, Most High, Yahawah. The name of His only begotten Son, yahawashi. Yahawah is the name of the Heavenly Father, who the world commonly calls God. Yahawashi to save the nation of Israel, who the world comes to call Jesus Christ. I want to say shalom, which means peace. You people listening and learning, you brothers doing this work, truth, sincerity, and to you elders that's been doing this thing before me, man. I'm glad that pulling out of here, gone. Peace. Shalom.